we can state the matter starkly. We cannot be good lovers if we don't know how to be vulnerable. We make ourselves psychologically vulnerable whenever we let a partner know some of the ways in which we're weak, needy, scared, immature, incompetent, or just plain odd. That is, some of the ways in which we're human. To be vulnerable is to dare to take off the usual cloak of normality and sensibleness with which we navigate the world, and, for once, to show someone who we really are, with all the fragility and unusualness implied. We might, as vulnerable people, admit to a desire to be mummied or daddied, to curl into a ball, to cry over a so-called small thing, to be reassured about an apparently minor flaw, to call up our lover every 10 minutes, to suffer from anxiety or paranoia, to speak in a regressive voice or hug a favourite stuffed animal. It's a hugely complicated step to confess, in front of someone we fundamentally want to impress and secure the affection of, that there are basic ways in which we fall short of what a proper adult is meant to be like. A certain kind of no-nonsense partner might well tell us sternly to grow up, complain about us to their friends, and make hasty moves to end a relationship. As a result, we often lie in love, not for advantage or thievery, but in order to hold on to a love that we desperately depend on. We pretend to be strong and unafraid. We put on a show of being someone else. Such acting works in many contexts. An uncomplaining, breezy competence and unemotive intelligence can make us an ideal employee, an admirable committee member, and a thoroughly respectable citizen of the modern world. But in an intimate relationship, this form of caution is fatal. Our fears and inadequacies don't vanish because we've hidden them. We don't get any less childlike or odd because we've learned to seem sensible. We simply end up living with someone who cannot know us, and who, because they are likely to take their lead from our own reserve, will not be able to show themselves to us in turn. We enclose ourselves in a prison of mutual deception. To dare to be vulnerable involves a faith that whatever we are inwardly most afraid and ashamed of in our own natures must have counterparts in other people. We cannot be alone in our oddities. The only people we could assume are normal are those we don't yet know very well. But once we are past their flawless exteriors, every other person we meet, and especially the person we're now dating, will have their share of follies. They will suck their thumbs, be scared of ghosts, have psychological compulsions, or worry about the size of their ears or the state of their friendships. To be vulnerable is in essence to let a partner catch a sight of us that dates back to childhood. The distant time when we feared that mummy would never come back, when we cried and no one comforted us, when daddy shouted at us and we were frozen with terror, when a rough friend told us we were a baby for still loving our stuffed elephant, when no one wanted to play with us in the schoolyard, when we tried and tried to explain and Granny was still angry. To be properly, fully vulnerable is to take the other person into the frightened, small places of our past, and to let them see that we are still, in significant ways, the little, distressed person we once were. Honest, vibrant love is an encounter between two vulnerable children who otherwise do a very good job of masquerading as adults. What makes people reject the offer of vulnerability? The strength they display is an indicator of how punishing they've had to be towards their own fragile inner selves. It's a measure of how fast they had to grow up. If mummy dismissed their nighttime fears, they'll have had to try to tell themselves, desperately, that mummy was right and that crybabies really are disgusting. They perhaps deflected the rough boy's taunting of Minko, who Granny knitted while they were still in the womb, and whose trunk had half disintegrated under the intensity of their hugs, by throwing the little soft toy in the bin. They managed their traumas by siding with those who hurt them. They focused on keeping their room tidy, passing exams, and learning how to do business. And so they came to fear the very thing that they now most need, an enfolding, restorative, and profoundly understanding tenderness towards their traumatized early selves. In a grim paradox, to have words of empathy whispered to them lovingly in the dark only reinforces their deepest fears. Their protective shell snaps ever more tightly shut at the approach of sympathetic love. They respond to their own needs with panic and self-disgust. We learn to be vulnerable by understanding that those who conveyed the imperative of a tougher, non-crying, non-fragile self were profoundly incorrect and in their way probably deeply traumatized themselves. Mummy was dismissive of our fears, not because she was impressively astute in her theories of human development, but because she was struggling with her own history of unattended need. The anti-Minko friend wasn't showing us the real path to being a grown-up. They were inflicting on us some of the unkindness that was, in other contexts, probably being directed towards them. We need to go back and convince ourselves, perhaps with a touch of anger, of how misguided our agents of growing up really were. Finding a partner with whom we can be vulnerable constitutes a supreme act of restoration. After a lifetime of denial and false strength, we stand to find in another person the sympathy that was sorely needed but unavailable to us in the past. The old wounds can be gently tended. We become stronger by learning to speak the language of weakness. By letting our hurt, babyish selves into a relationship, we open the way to a more nuanced, fruitful, creative, and accurate idea of what it really means to be an adult.